Hi, everyone. Today we have a very wonderful conversation with author Nora Szanto, who successfully raised $20,000 on Kickstarter for her middle grade chapter book, The Celestina Code. Thanks so much for joining, Nora. We have an exciting conversation planned for today. I'm so happy you could make time for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Good, good. Okay, so tell us very quickly, give us your elevator pitch on the Celestina Code and why kids or parents should read it.
Ooh, okay. So the Celestina Code is the unexpected outcome of my psychology master's, where I researched what makes extremely successful business leaders different from the average population. You probably would not put it, you don't see the link between the two, but I have two kids who were 9 and 11 at the time when I finished my thesis. And they were super interested in the topic and they wanted to know the secret of these high performers. So I started thinking, like, what is the best way to teach the kids about having a growth mindset and emotional intelligence and self-awareness, all these things. And since they've been very, very young, I've been telling them stories. And so I thought that the best way to go forward is actually to come up with a story, but a story which is a really exciting adventure story with lots of subtle messages. And this is how the Celestina Code came about, that the fictional characters who are representing two schools and are participating in a treasure hunt, not only around the world, but also in parallel universes, but they meet actually real life people. Some of them were actually featured in my research. Others I just interviewed at a later stage. And so they get important life lessons from these people. So this is what the story is about.
I've read it. It's amazing hearing how you came up with the idea and you're interweaving these psychological approaches into the story for how the characters cope with adversity and overcome the obstacles that they face during these challenges when they're on this quest. But then also all of the interesting people who are actually like real life inspirational people. Did you interview those people for your thesis, or was this just for the book?
So just one person is from the thesis, but the others I interviewed specifically for the book. And there I was also looking for the input of my kids because my son is a huge speed cuber, these Rubik's cubes, and he can solve it in, I don't know, like 8 seconds. And because of that, I reached out to the most famous speed cuber in the world. And he said, yeah, of course, I would love to do it. So, yeah.
So cool. So cool. I love it. I love it. So really, in terms of writing the book, it took you in a different direction than you thought in terms of like reaching out to all of these people and doing things you probably wouldn't have done normally when you're writing a book. The story is great. I'll put a link down below where you can read the story, so you can read the story yourself, because it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Adventure, it's futuristic, it has these very subtle but practical ways that kids can problem solve and come up with different ways to manage their emotions and enhance their social intelligence. So I think it's really great. And of course you tackle diversity issues, racism, bullying, all the things that kids in this age range are dealing with, as well as a little like self-discovery. And so the characters are really interesting, and there's a lot of growth and development. So overall, great story. Now let's get into the Kickstarter aspect of your campaign, because I want to get into, why did you decide to go with Kickstarter to launch this fabulous book?
It was, I could say coincidence, although I don't believe in coincidences, but what I did, I listened to a podcast about the crowdfunding campaign. I was like, this sounds like a really, really interesting tool. And then I started to dive a little bit deeper, but honestly, I didn't know much about it. And then, funnily enough, I'm part of a group here in Switzerland for women like working in Switzerland, something like this. And somebody recommended you very, very randomly. I was like, yeah, I still didn't know much about crowdfunding, but I thought this could be something at least worth investigating, whether that's the way I want to go forward. And I read some of your blogs, and you had like a webinar, which I attended, which I really, really liked. And then I said, okay, I'll give it a try. I'm a very open person, and I open-minded. I love trying new things, and I heard lots of good things about crowdfunding. So I said, maybe it's worth experimenting with it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's great. And I loved working with you and coming up with a creative marketing strategy to get this book out there. What, in terms of preparing, can you just tell people who are listening sort of what were the milestones we set so that you would feel comfortable launching? Because I think a lot of authors, they want to launch, but they don't know what is that magical number, or how do you know when it's time to launch? And there's a lot of anxiety around if I launch and I fail, what's going to happen? And so they're trying to minimize the risk of failure by like knowing when it's okay to launch. So in your mind, what was the milestone that you set for yourself to where you would be like, okay, now I feel confident that I can launch my campaign and have a crowd there to support it?
For me, it was a very interesting process, because one thing that I understood from you is that there is no such thing as a very successful crowdfunding campaign without having a solid base of followers. It's not true that it doesn't exist, because I'm sure miracles happen, but it's quite unlikely that if you have an email list with 0 persons on it and nobody has ever heard of you, you're not on social media. And this was my case. So to be very transparent about it, the day I started the crowdfunding campaign, preparing for the crowdfunding campaign, I had just like 0 marketing activities before, because I was just focusing on my master's, which was super demanding. And so you told me that, Nora, you have to have a certain number before you can actually start promoting it. And originally we started, do you remember when we started working together?
Yeah.
Was it in like I don't remember the month, but it doesn't matter. So I think originally I wanted to run the campaign in like, let's say October. But what we said is that I need to have an email list of at least with 500 people, and I have to have a certain amount of engagement. Don't be misled about the number, right? Because you can have 100 extremely committed people behind you, who would be then your ambassadors, and they spread the messages. But for me, it was like the 500, which is medium active. So we had some engagement, but it's not that they were really, we were very close, because I just kind of invited them to my ecosystem starting in that moment. So 500 was my number. And the 1st of October came, and I was so far from it. So I was like, this is just not going to work. And then we actually postponed it, and I just kept on working on it. And the 1st of March this year, so 2022, was the right time. By then, actually, I had 1,000 people on my email list. So, but this is how I decided when to start the campaign.
Yeah. So you gave yourself a lot more time to reach readers. What do you think was the best strategies that you found that got people to actually read, because it's a chapter book, you're not going to have everyone reading the whole book. And, we don't always want to make the whole book available, but, enticing. So what worked best for you, do you think, in terms of bringing people to actually read an excerpt or, part of the book?
So what worked the best for me ultimately was that I wrote, so I used Facebook groups to start with, and I wrote a fairly short post explaining the background of the book, what I just told you at the beginning of this conversation. So why I decided to write the book, how I believe children can benefit from it, the target audience. And I asked if any parent who has children aged 10 to 14 would they be willing to read the first 3 chapters and give me feedback on that? And it was actually great. So it was, for me, I honestly did not do it as a marketing hack. I really meant it because I wanted to know their feedback. And I created like a questionnaire, a Google questionnaire where they could add some information. And it was super interesting and very, very helpful. So not only to build a relationship with people, but they could actually give me suggestions. And also they felt being part of the whole process. And that one post became the foundation of this whole campaign as well. So this is what worked for me by far the best. And just for you to understand the numbers, when I wrote the post, finally, when I came to this idea, then my original objective was to have a comment or reply from 20 persons. And 3 days, you know how many people got back to me that they want to read the first chapters? 1,000.
1,000 people. So from one Facebook post, you had 1,000 people clamoring.
Crazy. And then, so it was so much that like for more than a week, from 8 in the morning until 10 in the evening, I was answering these posts. Also, Facebook just blocked me because they thought I was a bot. And also obviously out of the 1,000, so I sent it to 1,000 people. Everything. Oh, this is also, you remember this at the beginning. Everything was done manually. Every single step, like I sent one. Oh goodness! So that's why it took me more than a week. Later, because then later I started recycling this post. But so out of the 1,000 people who replied, maybe half of them actually read it, and out of that, maybe 20% gave the feedback. So this is kind of how it started.
Yeah. And I think that's important to remember, is that like the numbers, you start out really big. So you had 1,000 people who
showed interest.
Who showed interest. And then from there, a smaller percentage actually followed through. And from even there, a much smaller percentage actually engaged in a meaningful way. And so I think that the smallest number, we want that smallest number to be as large as possible before launching. And that's the part that takes the most time. So I'm glad that you gave yourself, back in October, you're like, okay, I'm really not seeing the signs. I'm not feeling like it's, we can move forward with the campaign. I'm willing to continue this process and give it more time so that smallest number is as large as possible, so that you're not having 20 people give you feedback. You're actually having 300, 400, 500 people give you feedback. And to do that, you have to reach 3,000, 4,000 people. I mean, so it does take time. What were some of the messages that you think like didn't resonate with people? Do you remember any of those? Obviously, asking for feedback was the most, and you were open and receptive to that, and people can tell. But what do you think like just didn't work that you wouldn't do again?
For me, what didn't work at all is, so still in this approach, I had some personal connection with them, right? Because we are part of the same group, we are all parents, so we could relate to each other. And then they answered my post. But what really didn't work for me at all was Facebook ads. And we tried, we tweaked. I'm not somebody who gives up because the first attempt, I didn't work, let's move on to the next thing. But it just, for me, it doesn't, I don't say that it's not a good tool, but for me, it was an absolute waste of time. And I think mainly because it's just such a noisy space. And there I'm a nobody, right? I'm just one of all these ads that are popping up. It's different from in the Facebook groups where, as I said, I'm just kind of one of them.
So were you running Facebook ads to your chapter download?
Exactly.
Okay, and that wasn't seeing any downloads?
Nothing, just the conversion, cost per conversion would have been $100 or 80, something crazy. Yeah. When I got each day easily 20 downloads for free.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think that's it can be tough or very expensive to dial in Facebook ads when you're driving them to a chapter download or something. And so it has to be it can eat up your budget very quickly. So focusing on the organic, as you know, if the organic is working and you're posting in communities where you're already a member, I think that's what's important. And that's all. Do you think it sounds like the fact that you were an active member in these groups helped tremendously, as opposed to kind of entering as a newbie? You can't just like enter in, say, hey guys, this is who I am.
Admittedly, I did both. But when I did the second, when I newly entered, I always spoke with the admin of the group and explained, look, this is the project I'm working on. Is it okay for me to post about it or not? And then if they said no, then of course I would respect that. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, you gotta play by the rules. So good. What, in terms of, you know, surprises, what surprised you the most throughout this experience?
It was a very positive surprise, actually, which was people coming forward, like really people with whom I haven't spoken for not years, but decades, right? You know, primary school mates, and the English is not even their native language. And they said, we just so much believe in the cause that we want to support you, or former colleagues. And that was really, really a beautiful experience. So
yeah, that's good. I'm so glad you have that. Not all authors do, you know, it can be tough because a lot of times, you know, when you're launching and you're putting something out there publicly, there is always the risk that your personal network it doesn't support you. So I'm glad that you had that experience, and that was positive for you. In terms of advice that you would give someone, if someone's like considering whether they want to crowdfund or not, what advice would you give them?
You know, I'm such a huge fan of crowdfunding now. I suggest this to everyone who is launching something new, whether it's a book or a product, or another type of product. Because for me, it just actually proved what I thought at the beginning, that it's a brilliant marketing tool on the one hand, because one thing is to write the book, but that's, even though for me it was a long process, it took me, this chapter book, like 18 months, but that's 20% of the work. You can write the best ever book if nobody knows about it, right? So then comes the marketing. And so it's a brilliant marketing tool. But the other thing for me was really something unexpected. So it ties in a little bit with the surprise, that it gave me such a great framework for everything, right? It gave me a strategy, the timeline. So I just had to follow everything, which I would have to do anyways, right? Because you cannot like publish a book and then market it without having these foundations that I had thanks to the Kickstarter campaign. And then the bonus is, of course, that you make, in an ideal case, money, which for me was double. I doubled my original goal. So it was just such a great experience. It was very, very tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. People say, oh, you know, it's really, really demanding and this and that. I'm like, I know how to work hard, but no, it is demanding. But for me, it really drained me, because I hate asking for money and I hate asking favor from people. But then I was able to kind of reframe it and just say that, you know, maybe actually I'm doing them a service, because I know the impact this book can make on their family's life, and the feedback that I got actually confirmed it. So when I went through this shift, everything got much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to stay with that for a second, because I think a lot of authors do feel like they're panhandling. You know, they're asking for funds and they're saying, hey, you know, can you spare some change for my Kickstarter? And I love that you initially felt that way and then shifted your perspective to say, no, I'm adding a lot of value to people's lives. They just don't know it yet. And so putting the value of what you're providing. I mean, we're all authors, we're all writing books, we're all writing things, and especially children's book authors are writing to either entertain or inspire or, positively. Everyone's writing to positively affect children in some way. And so there's always a social good that you can find in your book. And we have to find it, because that's the essence of marketing. That's like the key marketing message. You have to find, like, why should anyone buy your book? What impact is this going to have? And so I'm glad that you were able to shift your perspective and see that, and then say, okay, this is the value we're giving. And if you don't want it for yourself, can you gift it to someone else in your life and have a positive effect on them?
Exactly. That's what I did, which also made things easier for me. I said, look, this is the project. This is where you can find information about it. If you don't think it is for you, do you think someone else could benefit from it? And then I got like lots of contacts through my contacts because of that.
Yeah. So it was great. So you have this army of readers who've already read chapters 1 through 3, a lot of interest, whether they followed through with it on the first time or not. When you launched your campaign, what do you think was the most effective? Was it going back to those people? Was it reaching out to your email? What do you think was the most effective in terms of making launch day sort of like the biggest that you could?
For me, it was definitely having my launch team. So obviously I did not create this launch team the day the campaign started, but actually many members of my launch team came from the initial readers who were really very excited to be part of this process from A to Z. So from really shaping a little bit the chapters all the way to supporting the crowdfunding campaign. And that was brilliant because I had about 40 persons in my launch team. And then just if you make the calculation, on average, I think maybe they spent $40 to $50. That's a great start for because my goal was, I'm such a, can you say maximalist in English?
Yeah.
English
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
For me, I had to make my goal within the first 3 days, because I know that this is also something I learned from you, Lisa, how important the first 3 days are. So the first days, but I did the first 3 days. And I was like, I really do not want to stress throughout the campaign that, only 3 days to go and I still haven't made it, because then I would have gone into this whole thing with a very different energy. Instead, what happened, I think in 2 days and a half, I already made my original goal of $10,000. And then everything else was a bonus. And the launch team really, really helped me with that.
Nice. Did you incentivize your launch team with like an extra copy or an affiliate link, or like what did you give them to like really reward them for all of the work that they did? And I guess what did you ask them to do as a member of the launch team?
So starting with what I asked them to do, they had to buy a certain package, which was this early bird package that had lots of perks. And then, so that was kind of the obligatory bit, which we clarified before. So if they said, no, look, it's too much for me, then they just didn't join the team, and they could always go for lower tiers. To be very transparent, this was the $42 package. Okay, so this is what everybody committed to supporting. And so they got that. Then I didn't tell my background, but I work as a therapist. I'm a trauma specialist, and I use different modalities to help getting rid of limiting beliefs and subconscious blocks. It's a very powerful technique that I'm using, emotional freedom technique and some other versions of that. And every single person was offered a session. So they had that. But I also love gamification. And then I also incentivize them that the person who brings in through the affiliate link the most backers, then there were 2 things. So for the one who brings in the most backer, they had their child's name appear in the actual book. But then there was also kind of a random contest, and they received an illustration of their child in the Celestina Code illustration style. So that's how I incentivize them. But honestly, I really don't think that any of them have done the work they have done because of the rewards. They just really believed in the cause.
Right. So it's really about finding your core cheerleaders who are, 100% on board with the story and the mission and excited about the campaign. I think that's really clear. They know what Kickstarter is. They know how it's going to work. So you've done all the heavy lifting in terms of getting them on board, telling them exactly what to do, and then, getting a commitment, knowing going into launch day that they're all going to back at a certain level. I think that's brilliant. So you have incoming funds, and okay, this is what day one minimum is going to look like, because this is what the launch team committed to.
Exactly.
And it's such a brilliant, and they're getting the early bird, they're doing all of that. And so you're driving social proof to your early bird reward, so that any stranger who lands on it or sees it on social media from one of their posts now sees that, oh, there's 29 people who've backed this reward. That must be the one I should go to. And it just reduces the friction of the thought process of which one should I pick, and they just go for that one. So it kind of drives naturally, the psychology. You mentioned that you work and you rewarded them with extra things that weren't available to people outside the campaign, like the limiting beliefs workshop and all that other stuff, which is really nice, as well as the personalized touches of having the illustration. Were there any limiting beliefs that you found yourself having to overcome throughout this process?
Oh goodness, I'm so full of limiting beliefs and imposter
We all are.
Yeah.
Right?
The good thing is that that's what I do with my clients. So I really, really worked on myself, because I as I said, for me, asking for things, that's very, very difficult. So that was the biggest belief. But then when I reframed it, as mentioned, it worked really well. So yeah.
I think that's probably the number one issue that we all have when it comes to crowdfunding is, well, marketing in general, is looking at your own limiting beliefs, whether you don't believe you're worthy, or you don't believe you're good enough, or you're afraid you're going to fail, whatever it is. And then really looking at that and dismantling and either reframing it or abolishing it altogether, and just saying like this.
And I also
like this doesn't exist, and just go for it.
I love doing also visualizations. So, I think that's also a great exercise where you visualize the ideal outcome with all the emotions, and I think it's really, really good. I suggest that everybody to do that before the launch of the campaign.
Yeah. And it's true. And I think I love that you set yourself your goal to get fully funded within 3 days, so that mentally you wouldn't have to go down, because it is very energetically taxing to run a 30-day campaign. That's why we recommend it doesn't go longer than 30 days. And I've seen the energy spiral down. The longer it takes, the more you start to doubt, and the more those doubts creep in, and it kind of destroys the whole, the whole feeling of the campaign, because no one wants to feel pressured or obligated or like you're desperate. So you either have to hide those feelings or, not express them. So do you think you'll ever do a Kickstarter again?
Yes. But I tell you why I think I will, because I didn't mention the most important part this whole crowdfunding campaign brought to me. So we are authors. I believe that 99.9% of us are very creative. And this campaign allowed me to become really creative, right? You really want to think outside the box and what additional things you can do. And I also really pushed myself out of my comfort zone. So I reached out to people to whom I would not have reached out otherwise. And because another thing which was great for me which I wouldn't have done without the crowdfunding campaign, is the video, right? You are highly encouraged to create a video, and my video was so professional that it opened lots of doors for me. So combining that with the creativity, for example, as mentioned before, I was working or I interviewed, and he's featured in my book, Felix Zamdags, who is one of the top speed cubers in the world. And on the back of that, I reached out to some speed cubing companies, whether they would be interested in some kind of collaboration. And basically the first company and the biggest company I reached out, they loved the idea, they loved the book, they loved the crowdfunding campaign. So there was something which I did not expect, and they actually contributed to one of the rewards. But just going forward, because yes, I wrote this book, but Lisa, that I'm involved in other. So for me, this book is almost like a bit of a start, even though I spent 1.5 years on it. It's almost like a bit of a side track, because what I do is I work as a therapist with high performers, so business leaders and professional athletes. And but because of this book, I was able to reach out to a professor of maybe one of the top business universities in the world. And we also, because of that, I not only created the book, but I created workbooks where I featured some of the world's industry experts. For example, Professor Corey Zer, who teaches at the University of IMD. And now we are talking about how we could create a leadership program for like young leaders and athletes. This is something which is like I was invited to be a guest at their high performance leadership training a couple of weeks ago here in Lausanne. I was like, I have to pinch myself. Like, what am I doing there? It's just so unbelievable. And it is thanks to the crowdfunding. Otherwise, this would not have happened. So the answer is yes. Now that I saw all the benefits, I will definitely do it. And obviously, it will be much easier for me now because I don't have to start from scratch. So if the Celestina Code Part 2 is coming out, then that's the way for me to go forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's amazing that what started out as this idea from your master's thesis has turned into not only a product line, but a future leadership program, like a whole program. Yeah. And for people who are writing fiction, you can tie fiction into nonfiction all the time. And, that your fictional stories are still dealing with the human condition, and that ties to, nonfiction, real life applications all the time. So I think it's, kudos to you for having a broader vision and seeing where this can go. And I think maybe even relinquishing control a little and reaching out and saying like, hey, okay, like I'm not afraid to get a no. So let me just see. And the Kickstarter campaign gave people a way to see the interest in the book and to actually see it. So there's a bit of a proof of concept, and then they're like, yeah, willing to give it a shot, as opposed to kind of a blind pitch. If you were to launch the Celestina Code on Amazon, people might not be able to see how many books have been pre-ordered or anything like that. They might be relying on your pitch deck. And so it just puts it all in one place in a very transparent way that maybe made it easier for people to sign on. And it's a great book. It's a great book with so much good stuff tied into it and interwoven, that it's a knockout of the park. That's great. So awesome. So
one more thing that I remembered is that because of having such a successful Kickstarter campaign, it also generated interest in the media, because the media want to know what is this book? What is this book that generated $10,000 in less than 3 days? So I got a lot of media coverage as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think whenever I talk to authors and they say, okay, I want to write a press release, I'm like, you need something newsworthy first. You have to have either a success story like fully funded in 24 hours or raising 10,000 in 48 hours, whatever it is, like whatever your success is. It could be 500 pre-orders in 48 hours. It could be anything. So it's important to have that angle, either a success angle or a unique story angle, to make it newsworthy. It's simply launching a book, unfortunately, it's newsworthy for us, but it's not newsworthy to anybody else.
Exactly.
It's hard. It's hard. You're like, I've worked so hard. This should be newsworthy. And they're like, no, what else? What else do you have? Like, what's the catch? Is there anything else you want to share that we haven't covered yet, Nora?
No, I think we talked about a lot. So no.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to link to your book where people can buy the book, as well as to your campaign, so they can look at how you organized everything, and of course your amazing video. Let us know what is next for you for the Celestina Code. What are you doing in the next year or two?
What I am doing now is I am really trying to spread the awareness about the book and the cause. But I think I'm going to pursue a very different path from most authors, because I think I am going to create collaborations with top-level universities, and through that we are going to create like leadership programs, and probably that is the way to go forward. I don't say that it's impossible that a publishing house would pick it up and I do it with them, but for me, what I would like to achieve and the impact I would like to make on the lives of children, at this stage, I believe it's better for me to keep control. And if I want, I give away 100 copies, right? But maybe people pay for the workbooks, or the other way around. So that's why I am probably for the moment, this is the way to go forward.
Very exciting. I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens. I really would love to see the Celestina Code in schools everywhere, schools around the world, because it is such a great book. I would love to see it translated into multiple languages. And so I think this book has great potential, and I think the techniques in it are really amazing. And then paired with the workbooks, they can take, what's sort of introduced in the book and then learn more about it and actually learn the practical applications, so that we can give kids real solutions to help manage emotions and help them overcome everyday adversities that we see every day. So that's great. Well, thank you so much, Nora. This is wonderful. And again, I will be posting everything below so you can investigate further. Thank you, Nora, so much for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. It was a wonderful conversation as always. Thank you very much.
Thanks.